Hi, this is Will Phillips. I'm in the middle of a roundtable at Gainesville Health and Fitness with all of our discussions centering around how to differentiate and how to achieve better results. We're on a break now, and I wanted to share with you something that I talked about with this roundtable. And the topic is how to get better results back home. I believe that in order to get better results, you must begin with better implementation, converting your ideas on how to get better into actions on how to get better. And because we're never sure if they work until they work, you also need to have faster implementation, so that in 6 months you try 8 things instead of 1. Or instead of still being back at the starting blocks, considering whether you might try moving to biweekly pricing or something of this sort. So lots of experiments. And one of the skills in doing this here is doing small experiments that are low risk, low cost, and low disruption. We call them a prototype experiment or a rifle shot instead of a cannonball, so that you can do a lot of them without a lot of expended effort to find out how to hit the target. It's probably the only way you're going to hit the target a lot, and that is to try a lot. It's very difficult to know exactly how to implement your ideas back home. Now, there's a lot of pieces in these steps here, and they go on for maybe 2 pages, but I want to cover one very important piece right here on this sheet. And that is, in order to get better results, and better results means ultimately you know what the result or the goals are. So you need to know those to start with. The question is, how do you get there? And you begin by having this, by having strategy. Now, that is a totally misused term by most managers, executives, and business owners. We tack it on to all kinds of things because it's kind of highfalutin. It's kind of like calling the janitor the building engineer. And so we say we have strategic objectives, or we made a strategic decision. And God knows what that means. Mostly it means absolutely nothing. What I'd like to do is to share with you some insights from some reading I've been doing about strategy. This is from the book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, The Difference and Why It Matters, by Richard Rumelt. Bain & Company in their annual book review said it's the best strategy book in years. So here's what we're looking at. Bad strategy. What does it look like? Here's what he says, and he's got a book that's stunningly full of examples right out of the papers, from business, from government, from nonprofits, on how they fail to get better results because they did not have a strategy or a good strategy, but mostly because they didn't even have a strategy. First thing, we confuse goals with strategy. We think because we set a goal and we call it our strategic goal, that we have a strategic plan in place. False, false, false. Some of the most dramatic examples of having a goal not being a strategy have come out of the military. In the First World War, there were 2 large battles fought. In one, at Passchendaele, the generals knew what the goal was, and that was to overtake the German lines. In one day, 100,000 British soldiers died charging machine guns and artillery. And then it rained, and all the artillery holes were even worse. And during the whole Second World War, the front, the battle lines, hardly moved a mile or 2. They were not able to move. Simply having a goal is not a strategy, and it can be deadly. Second, with a pervasive sense of marketing insights and ideas in our world, We often confuse slogans with strategy. Slogans like persistence, never give up. Some of those slogans are absolutely dumb if you have the wrong strategy. Being persistent when you have the right strategy has a huge payoff, but you've got to have a strategy, not just a slogan. The other failure is what he calls, it's hard to write and talk, fluff. Fluff is managerial hocus pocus. It mostly comes out of the business schools, it mostly comes out of the academic community, mostly comes out of business writers and consultants. And if I were to be harsh, I would throw almost every vision, mission, value statement into the fluff world. Now, I really don't want to dismiss your vision, mission, values, purpose if you've created those and if they're really working for you rather than just sitting on the wall. But they are not strategy. They are just stated desires. They are intentions. It is not a strategy. So let's cross the bridge. What does a good strategy look like? 3 pieces. Number 1, same thing your physician does when you have a serious challenge, a diagnosis. We know what the symptoms are. I have itches here and spots here and a pain down here. The diagnosis is you have Lyme's disease. Oh, that's good to know. Because now I know that, I can go down to the cure. We don't use that word in business, so maybe what we'll say instead of the cure is the guiding decision. Richard Rumelt in his book skips that, and he calls this second piece here the policy. The policy that guides. Step 1, diagnosis. What's the underlying root causes that are creating the problem, as opposed to just stating the problem and then saying overcoming the problem is the strategy. No. It won't get you anywhere. You've got to go, because if I just treated the itches, the scratches, and the pains, I wouldn't be treating Lyme's disease. What the doctor does by making a diagnosis is he simplifies all the symptoms. The same is true in a good business diagnosis. What are the underlying causes? What is the collection of underlying causes that may create a syndrome? The syndrome may be a combination of what's happening in your market, your capabilities, and the personality of the CEO. If you read the Adizes book on corporate life cycles, where he describes different stages of life cycles, one of the more famous one is the founder's trap. The founder's trap is a diagnosis. And if you read the book, you'll see the underlying pieces in the diagnosis, and it points out some very specific kinds of guiding decisions or policies to cure the diagnosis. Part 3. You must take action now to convert your understanding of the diagnosis with your guiding principles with your goals or desired results in mind, because you want to achieve these, but you've got to get through this. And for health clubs, it might be that your membership growth is relatively flat in your mature clubs. You haven't figured out how to grow them. So how do we cure that? Well, what we do is we keep pushing on the same buttons, but it doesn't move. Generally, that's a good sign you have no strategy, or you have the wrong strategy. When you get the right strategy and have created guiding decisions or policy to cure the situation, then you take actions, and those actions have certain qualities. They have to be integrated, they have to be coordinated, and they have to build on each other. Now, one of the best guidelines to learn how to make all those things happen in your actions is Patrick Lencioni's charming little book called The 4 Obsessions of what is it? The 4 Obsessions of an Extraordinary Executive. And there's 4 steps. And what he does is summarize a really strong, excellent, and very simple approach to developing your organization's power. Most organizations pay no attention to this. They hire, they create systems, they create policies, but they don't generate organizational power. They have people going in different directions. And so we don't get the coordinated impact down here. So basically what we're talking about here is that you've got to know what the goal is. Then you have to create a strategy that's based on a real understanding of what's really happening. Then figuring out how to respond, and then converting that into a whole lot of actions. Let me give you an idea of good strategy and bad strategy, and something that you maybe all experienced, which is Netflix. Netflix started in the United States, in the Bay Area. It was a stunning success there. People loved it. But they couldn't quite figure out how to get people in Boston or Chicago to really build, to grow Netflix fast enough to make it a serious business. They were stymied. They thought that maybe these people were not as technologically savvy as the Bay Area people, and that they really needed to improve or simplify their technology. And that would have been a great strategy for them, because all the guys who developed Netflix were strategic guys. Tech guys from the Bay Area. So it was an easy solution. They had some other ideas, and that is that maybe the selection of movies was different in each of these towns, and they needed to do better market research to find out what people were watching in those towns. Because as you may know, not all movies are distributed to all major cities. So they're trying to move the Netflix business across the country. They have 2 different strategies in mind. Number 1, better selection of movies targeted to the area. Number 2, better technology. They're both wrong, because they had not done a thorough diagnosis. They didn't understand the problem. What they did next, before acting here, was saying, let's ask some customers about what's going on. And here's what they found out. In the Bay Area, you could get a new movie overnight. In Boston, it took 4 days. Had nothing to do with technology. Nothing. And it had nothing to do with the choice of movies. So their move was not to improve the technology, not to improve the selection, but to take an action that came up with their guiding principle, which was, we need next day delivery any place we want to grow. That was their guiding principle. So what did they do? First thing is, right outside of Boston, in a low-rent area called Worcester, Massachusetts, they created a distribution center. So your movies for Netflix came from here, not here. And they went on to build that rifle shot prototype. Grew Boston, bagoom, fast, big. So they then went on to create something like 157 other distribution centers in order to grow the business. So they figured out the right strategy. Then they could grow the business. So what I would say to you is that in your search for better results, we've got to get this happening back home. But to make that happen, you need to have the right strategy. So I would suggest in your roundtable and in your trios, you present your strategy. What's your diagnosis of the problem? What do you think is going on? And what would your guiding principle be? This stuff down here is easy. If Netflix had continued pushing here, they wouldn't have opened that door. If they continued pushing here, they wouldn't have opened that door. Only by learning how to open the door could they grow. So here's a way to tell if your strategy is on target. If it's not succeeding, it's probably the wrong strategy. Good strategies are generally implemented quite easily. Good luck.